Welcome to the Scrambled Paragraphs video tutorial. At this point, I want to tie in the concepts you've learned up to now into a procedure to follow for solving scrambled paragraphs. Now, everyone's process is going to be very different, so rather than give one definitive answer or approach, I really want to outline a framework for thinking about scrambled paragraphs and reviewing the different options for approaching scrambled paragraphs, and go over a generalized timeline. For example, we know scrambled paragraphs count for essentially twice as much as any other question. Well, in part because they take twice as long, and you should be budgeting about 3 minutes for a scrambled paragraph rather than 1.5 minutes for most questions. For the first 20 seconds or so, read the topic sentence carefully and identify the subject and paragraph type. I'll discuss more of each of these in a moment. Second, take about the next 30 plus seconds, 40 seconds, to mark pronouns, transition words, and repeat words. I like to write down RPT on paper. That's the way I think of it, to remember what I'm trying to do. Then for the next 1.5 minutes, begin by either finding sentence pairs, the first following sentence, or even in some cases the last sentence, and I'll discuss the 3 options in a moment, and ultimately complete the ordering of all your sentences. And at last, I like to take 30 seconds to wrap up and really check the logic of my ordering. Not just that the transition words and pronouns connect, but the structure of the paragraph makes sense, and there's a reason for each sentence being in the position it's in. So, with that, let's look at some of the particular details. Step 1, read the topic sentence and identify the subject. That is, who or what is this paragraph going to be about? And secondly, identify in a few seconds the paragraph type. Is the paragraph chronological, a compare and contrast paragraph, description, or explanation? Your next question might be, what does knowing really do to help? Each gives clues as to the logical structure and ordering of the paragraph. The next obvious question you might ask is, do they really help in practice, and which ones do? And I will give you my opinion, and I'm sure it varies, but I find identifying a chronological paragraph extremely helpful and effective at the outset. And chronological paragraphs can generally be picked out from the first topic sentence. There's some reference to time or dates or something to suggest a chronological ordering. And once that's determined, you can generally follow a date or a process order, first, next, last, in conclusion. That really helps put the paragraphs together and makes these oftentimes the easiest paragraphs to order. Second most useful, in my opinion, is the compare and contrast type paragraph. Unfortunately, these are very difficult to identify from the first topic sentence. But usually, as you go through step 2, the transition words will help you identify pretty quickly you are dealing with a compare and contrast paragraph. And usually they follow some order like topic A, then however, a key transition word to turn into topic B as part of the discussion, and then maybe some conclusion wrapping it up. So identifying that paragraph can be quite useful in structuring the logic of your paragraph and very helpful for you to get the right order. Description and explanation paragraphs are fairly similar in this regard. I'm not sure there's a great benefit to identifying these paragraphs ahead of time. There are some clues that are helpful. For example, description and explanation paragraphs often add additional information as they describe or explain a certain subject. So when you get to a sentence that adds no new information, quite often that's the last sentence in your paragraph. So again, this really comes down to your own personal opinion, but I find chronological and compare and contrast paragraphs are very useful to identify ahead of time, and description explanation probably less so. Take the next better part of the first minute to mark pronouns, transition words, and repeat words, what I would call the RPT. And as I mentioned before, I actually like to write that off to the side of the paper and write out the words as opposed to underline them. It helps me identify which is the most important between the R, P, and T for ordering that particular paragraph. Sometimes it's repeat words. Sometimes there's so many repeat words, it's overwhelming. Sometimes it's the pronoun that really gives it away. Other times there's so many pronouns, it's not very useful. And likewise, in many cases, 1 or 2 key transition words help put the ordering of the paragraph together. Unlike myself, I suggest you begin by underlining. If you change your approach later on, that's fine. Typically, underlining is the favorite approach. So, it's worth taking a moment to review what exactly pronouns are. Pronouns are words like I, me, my, mine. They're personal and object pronouns that are subject-based, I, you, he, she, it. Object pronouns that are me, you, him, her, us. Possessive pronouns that show ownership, mine, yours, his, its, ours, and reflexive that are also similar to possessive, myself, yourself, himself. Usually these pronouns are preceded by what's called the antecedent, the actual noun to which the pronoun is referring. The object of pronouns is really to break up a monotonous ordering or repeating of formal nouns. Typically, each pronoun can give a clue to the actual noun before it. The pronoun antecedent combination helps you place an ordering of the sentences. Identifying transition words can also be extremely useful. I like to organize my transition words into 4 basic groups, which correspond to the 4 different paragraph types we reviewed earlier. There are additive transitions, which you'll often see in description paragraphs, where you're describing something and adding to your description. There are adversative transitions, which show conflict or a shift in the line of conversation of the paragraph, which is often associated with compare and contrast paragraphs. There are also causal transitions, which can be in compare and contrast, but oftentimes in explanation as well. And then there's sequential transitions, and you'll often see the sequential transitions obviously in chronological paragraphs. Let's look in more detail at each of these categories. Let's see some examples of the first of these groups, the additive transitions. Although they can appear in any paragraph, they'll almost certainly appear in descriptive and explanation paragraphs. They'll identify something, that is, to say, namely, specifically. Or they'll add to a point, indeed, further as well, moreover. And in cases, they'll introduce a new topic, particularly, including as an illustration, for example, or refer to something, considering this, regarding this, concerning, or perhaps even express similarity in the same way, by the same token. The adversative transitions will typically be seen in compare and contrast paragraphs. They'll express dismissal or conflict of ideas being contrasted, or emphasis of ideas being compared. So that might include but by way of contrast, while, on the other hand, for conflict, emphasis would be even more, above all, indeed, more importantly, besides, for ideas being compared. Causal transitions, not casual transitions, but causal transitions, express some type of effect, result, or purpose. Examples of causal transitions include premises like if not, provided, on the condition that, in case, in the event that, as well as inference or concluding transitions like as a result of, consequently, hence, for this reason, thus. This list might also remind you very much of if-then statements on the deductive reasoning. And actually, the vocabulary used here might help you expand your vocabulary for the deductive reasoning if-then problems as well. And finally, sequential transitions will often appear in chronological paragraphs, as we mentioned, and they'll include words like subsequently, previously, eventually, next, to conclude, at last, as was previously stated, so and consequently. On to step 3. Step 3 is the best part of all. This is where all the action occurs. It's where we get to put things together. I mean, what could be better than a happy sentence pair? Well, okay, all right. A happy pair of puppies wins out every time. But this is where you begin to put together sentence pairs, perhaps find your first follow-on sentence, or your last sentence, ultimately complete the ordering of all the sentences. Now, this is also an area where instructors tend to differ on what is the best approach to begin ordering sentences. Some would tell you, don't find the first follow-on sentence. Make sure you put together sentence pairs. They may tell you when students get mixed up, they get tripped up a lot on putting the wrong first sentence in place. That may be true. However, if students get the wrong sentence pairs in place, I imagine they get tripped up there just as much. I've never seen an actual study on the matter, so I'm not sure I draw a definitive conclusion, but you should be aware of both options. And if you haven't seen it, we even put together a video showing how finding the first follow-on sentence improves your chances 5-fold for scrambled paragraphs. which by themselves have 120 different answer choices from the beginning. But what that fails to mention is that also selecting any pair reduces your choices down to 4 choices and also improves your chances 5-fold. And by the same token, actually finding the final sentence first, if that's obvious, improves your chances 5 times. Maybe there's something to be said about each of the possibilities for starting off. One way you might think about sentence pairs versus the first follow-on sentence as a way to begin is to realize that the first follow-on sentence really is just another sentence pair. It is a pair with a topic sentence. So why, you might ask, would this first sentence pair with a topic sentence be a better place to start? Is there anything special about that? Well, it could be. Again, there's no study that definitively says one way or the other, but there are, as we saw earlier, certain introduction transition words that might perhaps tip off a first follow-on sentence more easily, or it might be that the first follow-on sentence sets the logical framework for the paragraph. So for example, when we're looking at the logical structure, the first follow-on sentence almost always needs to answer the question, does this sentence elaborate on the first topic sentence? So that might have a lot to do with it. Alternatively, it might just be out of 120 different answer choices, there is nothing particularly special about the first follow-on sentence. Therefore, your best approach is to find the most obvious pairs, and statistically speaking, your most obvious pairs will be somewhere within the middle, not in the first follow-on. I personally like to use all tools. Sometimes I find the first follow-on sentence is clearly the best way to approach a paragraph. Sometimes I find putting together sentence pairs is the best way and then ordering them. And ultimately that helps you find that first follow-on sentence. I even occasionally find the last sentence is the best and most obvious sentence to begin with because the transition words there are often a giveaway to that sentence, and that improves my odds equally as well beginning right from there. Ultimately, find the best approach or approaches for you. Number 4 in the process, check the logical ordering of your paragraph. What do I mean by that? Ask the question, why is the sentence in this position? What is it doing there? Is it the first follow-on sentence that must elaborate on the topic sentence? If the sentence doesn't add any new information, is it possibly then the last sentence? Is the sentence changing the direction of the topic, perhaps indicating a comparing or contrasting statement? Is it clarifying or emphasizing a particular point already made? For example, it could be the first sentence elaborates on the topic, the second provides a supporting example. The third switches gears and introduces a new, contrasting idea. The fourth elaborates on that new idea. And then finally, the fifth concludes that that new idea is the better idea. That is a logical structuring that indicates what each sentence is doing within the paragraph. Although I list this point as a separate check at the end of the process, it really should be included in the tools mentioned in the last part of the process. Repeats, pronouns, transition words. The logical structuring of your paragraph is really used or kept track of throughout the entire ordering process. It's as important as any of the other tools, and maybe the most important tool. And I'll give one example. Buddhist followers were originally from Asia. Many philosophies were introduced by Buddhism. Buddhist ideas changed the way people live. If I used my repeat words, I might connect a word at the end of a sentence, like Buddhism, to a repeat of that word at the beginning of another sentence. But in this case, you can see I have Buddhist at the beginning of 2 other sentences. So that doesn't necessarily help me right there. How about pronouns and antecedents? Well, there's no clear pronoun or antecedent used in these sentences, so that tool doesn't really help me. How about transition words? Well, once again, there's no clear, obvious transition word that helps here. However, if you read this, it probably still is not difficult for you to order it correctly. Most students will look at this and say the follow-on to many new philosophies were introduced by Buddhism is Buddhist ideas changed the way people live, and not Buddhist followers were originally from Asia. That might come before or somewhere after in the paragraph. So the connection between these 2 paragraphs was put together with a sense of logical ordering not easily or quite obviously directly from the tools we used. Now that's not quite exactly true because there are a couple keyword tip-offs that new philosophies is used here in the first sentence and changed ideas is used in the second sentence. So one could argue that's a repeating idea, not exactly repeating keywords, but a repeating idea. But then again, that is the essence of the logical structuring. It's the idea underlying the sentence structure, not just the actual words. So hopefully this example shows that the logical structuring is very important. And this brings us to the end of our video tutorial on scrambled paragraphs. I hope it's been helpful. I hope it's elaborated many of the points you've learned up until now. And hopefully it will give you a few ideas or a framework for thinking about scrambled paragraphs and how to approach them. Good luck, have a great day, and for just one last time, let's take a look at those puppy pairs. So cute.